I'm Stacy Reeves. I go by the pronouns of she and her. I'm from Wells Fargo Risk Mitigation and a proud member of our Pride Enterprise Leadership Team. I'm so excited to have you all interested in our engaging topic about age. I will be our moderator today. This topic was initially triggered when I was making a career change and wondered if my demographics would be an asset or a liability. Then I saw a presentation that stated aging was considered 50 plus. Well, one of my favorite musicals is Mamma Mia, the theater version, not the movie version. And as Donna would say, I am 50, ... Now, let's get to know our other panelists. Chris?
Thanks, Stacy. Hopefully everyone can hear me. My name is Chris Malstead. I'm at Wells Fargo and I'm part of the international COO team. I'm really passionate about channeling the empowerment that comes with being an LGBTQ person, an out one, and bringing that into other parts of one's life. I just turned 51 and I've received my first senior discount. So let me pass it back to you, Stacy.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Now let's go to Marianne.
Thanks, Stacy. Hi, everybody. I'm Marianne Cook, also with Wells Fargo. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am an ally to our LGBTQ community and work very closely with our Pride Employee Resource Network here at Wells Fargo as an HR consultant. And I also recently got the AARP card in the mail, which has triggered a lot of these questions that we're going to talk about today. So looking forward to being here with everybody. Stacy?
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that. Now let's turn to John.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is John Lake. My pronouns are he and him. I lead Wells Fargo's diverse segment marketing team. I also have the privilege of leading LGBTQ strategy for the enterprise. I've been working with the LGBTQ community in various roles since the late 1990s. So I guess that dates me right there. I've been at the bank for 8 years, and prior to that, led the corporate program at the Human Rights Campaign, actually, for many years.
Thank you, John. And now we'll turn it over to Cheryl.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cheryl Wayland. My pronouns are she and they, and I'm the Director of National Education Initiatives at SAGE, which is the country's largest and oldest organization dedicated to serving LGBTQ plus older adults. And I'm just really excited to be here today and join our friends at Wells Fargo for this presentation.
And we're excited to have you, Cheryl. Thank you for the partnership. I would like to turn this back over to John to share a personal reflection to frame up the rest of our discussion.
Awesome. Thanks. And so to frame up the discussion today, I was asked by this group to relate a story about when I realized I was on the other side of the mountain when it comes to age in the LGBTQ community. And it was hard to kind of identify that one moment because I think it was more progressive, especially in a community like this that is so focused on youth. You know, the cues start coming pretty early on. But I think it was most vividly brought to life a couple of years ago when I was recognized by a publication called Business Equality Magazine for being what they called a Pride Legacy Leader over 50. And at first, I was like, wow, that's really cool. But then it hit me that now everyone's going to know I'm over 50. And I think I was Chris's age at the time. I think it was 51. So I was early into my 50s. But still, there was that pause and hesitation. And I actually considered, not taking the recognition for fear of how it might impact how I was perceived at work or potentially by future employers if I had chosen to make a move. So it was almost like coming out all over again, only coming out as a kind of over 50-year-old. But of course, I ended up realizing the value in just owning it and being a part of what really ended up a truly amazing group of individuals that had done so much to further the LGBTQ movement, and especially our community when it comes to the workplace. So in the end, I think our age gives us experience, but I also think it gives us responsibility to be visible and to set an example for those that are coming up behind us. And, sure, we can kind of dwell on the negative and, talk about how they have it so much easier today and do that whole these kids today kind of thing. But I think we also have to remember that we helped create this workplace environment. And it's an environment that has now started to welcome and accommodate and even nurture all forms of orientation and identity, and many of which weren't even named when we started this work. So being over 50 gives us an amazing perspective. Stonewall just happened a little over 50 years ago. So I think, we can take a step back and realize and own how in just our lifetimes, we've seen so much progress, and in so many cases helped create that progress that has led to our ability to sit and have that discussion today. So I'll stop there, but I think that was the context that I kind of wanted to put this discussion in as we own our power going forward.
Thanks so much, John. Appreciate that story. Let's get to know our audience a bit better. Chris is going to prompt us for a couple confidential polls. In addition, Chris will be doing monitoring of some chat.
Fantastic, Stacy. Hopefully everyone can hear me. And for the attendees, we'd like you to look at the first two polling questions that are on the session page. And I can see that we're already getting some responses. But let's start with the first one, and we'll get the answers to this for about a minute. And so we just want to work out what the age bracket is that you're in. And again, as Stacy mentioned, this is anonymous, so you don't have to come out with your age yet. And so if you, over the next minute, let's see what the age bracket is that we have. And we'll just pause on this question for about 20, 30 seconds. Okay, the numbers are moving a little bit, but it's interesting. The majority of our attendees are in our third bracket. About 70% are in the 50 to 65 age range, with about 26%, the number is moving, between 31 and 49, 2% under 30, and 2% over 65. So thank you, everyone. This is really great. You can continue to answer the questions if you didn't have a chance, but we'd love you to focus on them at this time. And then the second question that we'd like you to consider is, today, how do you feel your age, or do you feel your age is a liability in the workplace? Do you feel it's not at all a liability? That it might be, but you haven't experienced any problems? That you definitely experienced it some? Or that it is definitely a liability? And let's see what people think about that. We're getting some movement.
Great.
All right. So interestingly, the majority, about half of our respondents, feel that age might be a liability in the workplace. Happily, almost a quarter of our respondents really think it's not at all one. That's terrific. Yes. Some, 15%, have experienced it some, and about 9% feel that age is definitely a liability. So Stacy, I'm going to turn it back to you, but with the reminder that I will be monitoring chat, and I'm also going to ask some questions to our attendees that are going to parallel some of the questions that the panel is answering.
Excellent, thank you. Well, first I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl. Cheryl, what are the issues that you see affecting members of the workforce as they hit that 50+ sweet spot we're discussing today?
That's really a great question, Stacy. And, I just want to start by saying I'm 51 years old. And, I've always felt that I was kind of in the middle when it came to my age. When I first started working in the aging world, a lot of older adults felt that I was too young to be doing this work. And now sometimes I feel the opposite, where some of the younger folks coming into this work think that I'm too old. And so it really, is kind of a balancing act when we think about where we are in our career paths and how age is related to that. But one of the things that I recently heard in regards to ageism is, thinking about aging is living. And this really made me stop and think about how we embrace aging and make the most out of every day, and how our lived experiences at work and in our personal lives really does help us along our professional journey. We can start to really serve as mentors to younger, workers who are coming into the workforce. And I think we also provide balance to the workplace, because oftentimes, we're pretty settled, and we know where we want to be along the career path. So, from a work perspective, this is also a time in life when many of us are starting to think about that second phase of our lives. Where do we want to be in the next 5, 10, 15 years? For some of us, that's really starting to think about retiring. And so with that, we need to be thinking about financial planning and what that is going to look like. For others, we may be thinking about making a career change, and how does that align with our passions? And we may decide to leave the corporate world and turn to the nonprofit world, where we're really able to work and maybe volunteer from a place of giving back and really feeling passionate about our work. When we think about retirement, research has shown that LGBTQ folks are oftentimes concerned about outliving their retirement and their savings. So this amplifies the need for early financial planning and to really, think about potentially having to work later in life and not being able to retire as early as we may have hoped. Um, Additionally, research has shown that LGBTQ plus people provide caregiving support and, to our families and friends at numbers that are equal to, if not higher than our non-LGBTQ peers. So thinking about workplace policies that support caregivers is a growing concern, as a majority of caregiving is provided by families. And for LGBT community members, our families often include our families of choice. So, these are just some of the concerns that we often think about within our work at SAGE and in supporting LGBTQ older adults in the workforce. And Stacy, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Cheryl, I would like to ask a question. What are some things that maybe people could call out if they are trying to transition in an encore career, if they've been in, let's say, a financial sector or something very different?
Yeah, so I think for folks that maybe are coming from a financial background, looking at opportunities to work in development at a nonprofit or in their financial departments, helping with accounting. Those are skill sets that I think are very transferable. For other folks, maybe they've had a marketing background. So, could you support a nonprofit in their communications department and helping them to really lift up the message around their missions and help spread the word about their work? So those are a couple of areas that I think are really transferable between the corporate world and the nonprofit world.
Right. Thank you. Let's shift to Marianne. I'm going to ask a question of her. What programs or efforts have you seen that help take advantage of what older people can offer?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this in two ways. The first way I'll address it is perhaps as a member of your organization. And so I wanted to share one of the programs here at Wells Fargo that we call Glide. It is a relaunch program for mid to senior level professionals who have at least 7 years experience, but have been out of the workforce for 2 years. So Cheryl mentioned caregiving. Maybe you have had to take time away to care for a family member or somebody in your community. Maybe you have had a child or adopted a child and needed time away to care for your new family member. Maybe you've gone back to school. Maybe you did take some time off to volunteer and work at a nonprofit. But these are all the kind of people that find themselves further along in their careers and looking for ways to get back into the game. And so we have, it ends the GLIDE program at Wells Fargo. It's an actual internship program. And we do target folks in the LGBTQ community, among other kinds of diversity dimensions, to help sort of bring them back in. We set a cohort up of folks, kind of a class, put them through an 8-week internship, which could be, you know, brushing up on skills, certainly learning about Wells Fargo and learning about your job that you'd be doing here, but really helping to kind of re-enter the workplace. And we started this program just last year. It has been a terrific success. And so that is one way, Stacy, that companies can think about setting up programs, internships, ways to help people typically older in their career who've stepped away for a number of reasons, come back into, you know, not going back and starting back at an entry-level role, but really coming into a mid or senior level kind of professional role. I was then going to talk about some ideas for you personally. So how do we as individuals stay relevant? And my day job is in learning and development. So I think about these topics all the time with my team. How can we help people wherever they are on their career spectrum, from our newest hires to our most senior level or more senior career professionals. And hopefully you're at a place where you do have some internal resources to develop and grow your skills. I know at Wells Fargo, we hear this all the time, that people are really looking for a learning culture. And so one of the things I encourage everybody to do is look there at your workplace. What kind of continuing education opportunities do you have? You probably have some structured programs. I know Wells Fargo has offered a diverse leaders program. Again, a cohort learning experience for LGBTQ employees. We have other kinds of diversity programs as well. But look for formal structured kinds of programs, but also look and see what kind of informal learning, informal training. You probably have a learning management system that houses all your training. And I know we have a ton of content that can be very quick and very specific about, you know, Excel or PowerPoint or learning about Agile. But those are, that would be the first place I would go, is seek out your L&D partner or your learning management system and look for some of those opportunities. You might also want to look outside. There are all kinds of terrific certifications. I mentioned Agile. That's kind of a hot topic right now in corporate America or in other organizations. So how can you learn about the Agile way to work and business process, compliance kinds of topics? There are a number of these kinds of skill set certifications that are available, and often organizations will reimburse employees for taking these kinds of courses, especially if they're relevant to your current role. The other thing I would say is the volunteering that you do, whether it's inside or outside of work. We're all very involved with our employee resource network. That's how we've come together, many of us here on the panel. And this is a terrific opportunity to continue to develop your skills, continue to really share the expertise, share your experiences in the world and bring them back to a group, whether it's a local chapter group or a more company-wide kind of forum. But Stacy, I'll wrap up now on this topic, but we do have in our slides, we have a list of some resources. Sage is on the list, our partner that Cheryl represents. We've got some LinkedIn groups. We've got some national organizations. So hopefully between looking internally, looking externally at some of these resources, there are some great ideas that you can take advantage of in terms of leveraging your skill set.
Mary Ann, fantastic information. Additionally, our technology team is continuing to recruit people, and that's part of those resources that you mentioned, that they're going to various fairs to recruit people, whether it's in Lesbians Who Tech or other ones that are included. Just again, that's not necessarily specific to aging, but it's specific to our community. Cheryl, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of additional resources that go along with this idea of, transitioning in the workplace, moving from, this time in our careers, maybe looking for additional careers. One would be the organization called Encore Careers, and you can learn about that group at encorecareers.org. And this really helps us to reimagine this second phase in our lives and looking for career opportunities that may pair you with a nonprofit that's looking for support. Another one, especially for folks who may be concerned about ageism in the workplace, is from the Age Friendly Institute, and they can be found at agefriendly.org. And they really help to identify corporations who have age-friendly employment practices. So I think if we're looking for new work, try to find organizations that are LGBTQ inclusive and that are also age friendly. And so pairing those two things can be really powerful for LGBTQ folks over 50 who may be searching for new employee opportunities.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. I know when I was making that transition, it was interesting to me that even some certifications in Six Sigma, for example, that I got years ago was relevant in today's marketplace. And what I mean by relevant was that not only do I continue to utilize that in my day-to-day, but that it was relevant to the people seeking to employ me, which shows that not everything just in college matters. It's continuing to keep yourself refined throughout your career in order to keep up with the industry trends. At this point, I'm going to turn to Chris and see if we have anything from chat that you would like to share.
And absolutely, and hopefully people can hear me.
Yes.
If anything, that we've got a lot. So
great.
So I ask for grace if I don't touch on the comments that people have made, because people have a lot of wisdom here.
Excellent.
We started by asking what challenges people have seen as an older LGBTQ person in the workforce, and we're hearing that people are afraid of changing employers, of finding a common ground with younger incoming employees, even just finding something relatable to connect on. Specifically, one person said that that he was afraid of being told that maybe he was too old to learn new technologies. Another person, to a point that was raised, was worried about figuring out healthcare as an aging trans woman, and another. Let me just one last comment that if having been at his employer for 20 years, he fears losing his job and having to move and not being able to find anything. So there's a lot of anxiety out there. And I know that there've also been some specific questions to some of our panelists, some of which we've had responses to around programs like the GLIDE program.
Well, I will certainly empathize with the career-changing fear I had over 30 years at one company, and it was my entire adult life. So if you think of how are you coming to that decision, why are you coming to that decision, and then what can you bring to that employer who is looking at your previous experience and your skills as an asset, so that you can not only learn the new ways of doing things, but that you have the opportunity to introduce some things that might benefit your new employer. Anyone else on the panel care to comment on any of the things that Chris has shared before we turn to any specific questions that he wants to share?
Stacey, I was just going to put a fine point on what you said about capitalizing on the experience and what you have to offer an employee or an employer as an employee. And so I wanted to bring up the concept of mentoring, and it goes both ways, right? So to help make yourself more marketable, being willing to mentor somebody else on the team who may be younger, maybe have a different skill set or still growing their skill set. So I know at Wells Fargo, we do have through our Pride Employee Resource Network, we do have a mentor-mentee program. And so that can be a great way to offer up your experience, the wisdom, Chris, that you mentioned, just with how to succeed potentially, over the long haul in the work world with so much change and so much going on. And so being willing to mentor and be proud of what you know and have lived and seen, and be willing to share that with perhaps younger folks that you work with is one way. And then of course there's the reverse, is potentially being willing to say, I don't know this new technology or this skill set, or this agile mindset that everybody's talking about, and seeking out somebody that could mentor you in a particular area. So
Yeah.
most organizations, or many organizations, do have some form of mentor programs, and those can be really valuable. You get in there and you define what it is that you're looking for, and it can lead to some really terrific growing and relationships over time.
Fantastic point about you get something out of mentoring just as much as you're giving. So thank you for sharing that. And for me, the mentoring became, really wanting the opportunity when I joined Wells Fargo to become part of the enterprise leadership team for Pride, in order to, lead by example and have I basically, I'm a region chair, so I have all these chapter chairs that gives me that ability to not only learn, but to mentor, and to set the example as being a gay woman, in order to, show that, I'm still here, even though I said it, right? Anyone else care to comment? Chris, would you like to share any questions?
Two quick ones, if we can. First of all, and this is probably a question for you, Marianne, for the GLIDE program, how do you find the individuals? Do candidates apply for it, or is it a targeted platform for prior employees?
It is open. So we advertise broadly and use our typical recruiting channels, in addition to others. We're not going to college campuses typically, but no, it's open to anybody who's interested.
Excellent.
And we have included that link in our materials.
Thank
Fantastic.
you. Yes.
And one more question. And what about when you're just fearful to make the jump? One person is, sorry about the noise in the background, is in L&D, is 67, disabled, has a service dog, and is trans. And she guesses that would be a DE&I grand slam. But,
Love it.
What about when you're just fearful to make the jump?
Mm-hmm. Would anyone else like to share? Well, I can say fear is it's going to be there. And I think once you face it, you get a little bit more confident each time you take a chunk out of it. And, you have to try in order to be able to get past that. And certainly, as we brought up today, be able to demonstrate or go to some of the resources that look to you to be an asset, and that advertise for that, because if they don't, they're really not getting a well-balanced workforce. Anyone else care to share?
I would just like to compliment the woman who asked the question on her bravery.
Yes.
I mean, I know, thinking in terms of jumping to another job, as a white, able-bodied man makes me scared. I wanted to acknowledge that bravery that would come from jumping into something like that, with that grand slam that you discussed. But I really think that those can be welcomed in the workplace, as workplaces are looking to diversify even further. So think about it as pluses, not negatives.
Yes, thank you, John. I feel fear is a natural reaction. So we're here. We hear you, and we appreciate your courage. Thank you. All right.
Can I
Anything
ask
else?
one
Sure.
last question popped up that's really topical?
Okay, perfect.
Which is, do you think the pandemic has made it easier, harder, or maybe made no difference for older individuals in the workplace?
It's a good one.
Well,
Who would like to start?
We actually see some comments coming in from other audience members on there. Somebody just said harder.
Emphatically.
Yeah, and I think, especially if we think about so many of us, shifting to this remote work environment that was really unfamiliar. And, so adjusting to that, that was not easy, right? And potentially losing some of those social connections. And then also adding in caregiving on top of that. Many of us were not only trying to hold down our job, but we're also caregiving for others. And, COVID has increased that need for caregiving across our communities. So I think it has had some challenges to it. And for many of us, it has been harder. So I thank you for asking that question. And it's important to acknowledge that.
I think caregiving is a key one. Adult children that move home when you weren't expecting it, people having to educate children while also juggling a job. That's not just limited to people in their 20s and 30s. Sometimes I know I have a sister that is the primary caregiver for her grandkids and has had to do that. And of course, get current on things that she hasn't done in quite a while. Other thoughts from anyone?
Stacey, I would just add maybe one glimmer of hope is with the pandemic, so many people are rethinking work and careers, what they want to do. And I think many of us have heard about the Great Resignation that's either underway or it's coming, or I'm not really sure where we stand with that, but it's out there. So there is a tremendous amount of movement happening. And there are a lot of open jobs out there. And so on the one hand, it's unfortunate why there are so many open jobs because of COVID and the pandemic. But there are so many people moving around right now that this could be a good time to make a move. In addition to just rethinking how you want to spend the rest of your working years and making some of those choices, but there could be opportunities out there as work and people are really resetting in terms of their jobs and where they want to be and what they want to do.
I agree. And thinking of being a mentor, one of the things that we had talked about on my team is I've telecommuted for a number of years and other people hadn't. So we had some very frank discussion from people who just were struggling with what to do, how to do it, and learning from somebody who has already figured that out. It's personal for each person, so it doesn't necessarily become one size fits all. But again, how can we help each other during these difficult times, I think is what's key. All right, anything else, Chris, before we turn to John?
There's a lot, but let's move on.
All right, John, what commonalities do you see in coming out as LBGTQ and coming out as an older person?
I think that's a really interesting question, actually. Because when I think back, when I was just starting out in my career, I remember being told that I would not be successful if I came out as gay. This was the late 80s-ish. I was in a client-facing role at an ad agency, and there were just expectations you had to meet. It was very much an old boys network, and I guess I was lucky at the time to have the privilege to be able to pass in that somehow. But for many years, I did believe that it was something that I had to do, and I know it held me back. Because when I had the opportunity to be fully myself, that's really when my career path kind of came into focus. Because I wasn't spending all that energy hiding who I was, and I was able to leverage that part of me to the benefit of those that I was working with and working for. And as a side story, it's interesting to note that my boss at the time turned out to be gay, as well as several of the clients I was working with. We were all just hiding it based on the expectations we faced at the time. So, similar to that, it's kind of ironic now that I'm getting closer to, the other side of my career. The idea of coming out as 50 plus could be a detriment as well. That idea of coming out, I think is a little bit parallel. And I know a lot of us see it this way, and there may be some truth to it in some cases, and some cases maybe not. But we came from a time where you wanted to be perceived a certain way to be successful. And in the same way as leaving the closet helps to bring your complete value to your work life, I actually think that embracing age and experience can have the same effect. So I think that's a similarity, especially as LGBTQ people, because if you think about how our generation had to prove themselves after being told we can't come out and be successful, I think we've developed some serious life skills going down that path. And it's beyond just experience. We built our careers on tenacity and perseverance and endurance that we might not have developed if we hadn't faced entering the workplace as an LGBTQ person when we did. So kind of tying it back to your original question, our generation, what primarily we're seeing with us and those on the call today, I think we're the ones who built visibility for how LGBTQ employees can add value to the workplace. And what that has in common with being an older person on the job is I think it's visibility, again, is the only way that we're going to continue to prove our worth as we age. So to continue that visibility.
Thank you, John. Cheryl, anything more to add?
Yeah, I just really want to second what John said. And I think, for those of us 50 plus, we're really one of the first out generations, who came out in our work environments, whether, somebody mentioned in the chat, transitioning on the job in the 90s, it was a BI. Yeah, right. We get that. It was scary. It was hard. Coming out as gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender, during the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, we didn't.
We lose Cheryl?
I think
think she might have frozen.
Didn't have
Okay.
job security.
Okay, we have her back.
I think she's frozen again.
Uh-oh.
Oh, well.
Okay,
I-
Cheryl, if you can hear us, we're going to move on. We're not getting you clearly. Okay. With that, I'm going to turn to Mary Ann.
Actually, I see Cheryl just popped back in. I think you're
Okay.
with us.
Oh, and unmute. You're
Cheryl,
on
are
mute,
you
Cheryl.
there?
Though.
I am back. But
Okay,
feel
great.
free to carry on, folks.
The wonders of tech.
Yes.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts. With this, we'll turn to Mary Ann and ask, what tactics should older people make to make sure that they employ when they are considering a job or even a career transition?
Mm-hmm. So networking is really important. Getting out and talking to different people, looking at the kinds of companies that you'd want to work for that do value your age or experience, the diverse experiences that you bring to the table that John sort of touched on. Then there is the question about your resume. Do I put the actual year that I graduated college on my resume? How far back do I list all my jobs? And do I put months and years by those? And that's a personal decision. Nobody says you have to put all those numbers on there. Maybe you want to, but it's something worth considering, really looking at your resume, maybe working with somebody, asking for some input on how to make your resume as eye-popping as possible. And that might include removing some jobs earlier in your career that maybe that just aren't relevant, or your more current roles speak to the skills and experience that you offer. I definitely, again, we should highlight the kind of work that we're doing in our employee networks, our volunteerism, anything that you're doing outside of your, day job, because those kinds of skills are more and more being recognized. That if you're working as a treasurer or something at, at a club outside of work, that there are really transferable skills that you have that you can bring back to the workforce. So really making sure that your resume is complete to the level that you're comfortable, that and that you use your resume and the networking to talk to a variety of companies, and use the time and the experience as a chance to sort of interview that company. And is it a place that values what you offer? And again, there's a lot of movement happening in the workplace right now, a lot of different companies to consider. And so take your time, do some research. We've got some resources listed on the slides that you'll receive. But really think about what is the right match for that next move. Whether it's a new job or a career transition, a second act maybe that you're considering. But take your time, do your research, talk to people, and see what you can learn, and then figure out how to put your best foot forward for that particular role, that particular company.
Thank you, Mary Ann. And Cheryl, what would you like to add?
I was actually over here reading the chats, so I think, go ahead. Were you going to say something, Stacey?
No, I was just going to, you can share if you'd like. If not,
Okay.
I'll mention something that you said if you didn't recall.
Yeah, I can mention it. Yeah, that I think, as we think about aging and also how that relates to our DEI and belonging work, are we including older adults and also people with disabilities in that broader lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion? And I think that can also help move the needle, so that we're really embracing age as a benefit to our work environments.
And one of the things that you mentioned, Cheryl, though, is that you can ask when you're applying for a job. You might be asked if you're a veteran, you might be asked if you're disabled, but you're not normally asked if you're LBGTQ. So an opportunity to put yourself out there would be to add that to your resume, because of the fact that there are companies seeking you that won't know it otherwise. Right. Correct?
Yeah, it definitely. I think especially from that DEI lens, with that focus that's even more heightened today, if you've been a part of your employee resource groups, mention that, show that as a benefit to your organizations. Are there volunteer organizations? Have you been on boards? Have you volunteered in the LGBTQ community? Those are all things that can help lift your profile for potential employers.
And one of the things that I thought you mentioned that was really good, and Mary Ann kind of touched on this, is if you're discriminated against or feel you are, that's probably not the place you want to work anyhow, right? So whether it's the intersectionality of LBGTQ, or whether you're bringing race, gender, whatever you're bringing to the table, just make sure it's your whole self, because that's who that employer is hiring. Anything else to add?
I think you read my mind, Stacy.
Maybe we've been chatting.
Maybe.
All right, speaking of chat, let's turn to Chris. Chris, anything you'd like to share from chat?
Again, an abundance of wisdom and some interesting questions. Going back just a little bit, to this question of coming out in the workplace and its application to other aspects of your life, someone asked a question as to whether or not we think, or the panel thinks, or participants think, whether older LGBTQ plus people cover more. Are they more likely not to be as open about their sexuality?
I'll take that first. I think that's a really interesting question because, as I kind of brought up, we were taught, a lot of us were taught to be, a lot of us were taught to cover. And that was just the place that we were coming from early in our careers. And I think that for many of us, that's lasted and that's endured. The good news is I think we have helped to create a space where the younger generation doesn't necessarily need to cover as much, and they might feel more open to how they can express their orientation or identity at work. I hope that's the case, and I certainly see it among our employees at Wells Fargo. They've taught me a thing or two. So I would say the answer to that is yes, but it's because that's how many of us were brought up. And I know that's a generalization. It's not the case for everyone, but I do think that that's probably how I would answer that.
I agree. I think that it's not only environment, but it's a little bit about what we talked about earlier, a little fear, a little feeling it out. But also, Chris and I have talked about the fact that because you've been maybe hiding that, what does it do to your health, in the long run, right? And so it's coming through that as well to say, okay, how can I face this? What are the benefits? When I switched companies, I waited. And I actually selected Wells Fargo because, number one, somebody said, well, they should be good. I mean, they're based in San Francisco, which is a stereotype, right? But for me, it was, I'm going to wait and see once I actually get there, right? And I needed to see if I felt comfortable first. And then it was, all right, I'm going to join the network, see how they're accepted. And all of that went well. And at that point, I was able to uncover and, haven't looked back since. Anyone else like to share?
How about one other quick question, going in a very different direction? One of the people in the chat, this person has on this person's team, this person's 50 years old, but has someone on their team who's turning 60 this year. And this person's finding it hard to motivate the person turning 60 as his career goals are now seem to be retirement. So does the panel have any tips on how the person can keep the person turning 60 happy and productive? And I should note also that the person turning 60 has only been with the organization for 18 months. But how does a manager keep someone who is approaching retirement happy and productive?
Who would like to take that?
I would add, I can sit here and daydream about retirement all the time, and I'm 51. So, so what, how do we motivate folks who are, kind of in that second phase, the end stage of that second phase in their career? Take time to find out, what might excite them. Can they help mentor younger folks? Can show them the value that they are bringing to the workplace and really build on their skill set in ways that might help motivate them to give back to this younger generation as they start to think towards their own retirement. just a couple of things that I can think of, and I'm seeing some comments actually come up in the chat that might help as well.
Great, thank you. John, I'm going to turn to you. In your role as Wells Fargo marketing for the LBGTQ segment, how have you highlighted the value of the older generation?
So thank you. I think one of the most important things we can do as advocates of a certain age within our companies is to be a champion for the inclusion of an older cohort when our companies are considering marketing to LGBTQ consumers. So this question really resonates with me. So much imagery in pop culture represents the youth of the community. And that's what so much of the marketing out there also tends to focus on as well. So there becomes this perception that we're all young and that those of us of a certain age are actually somewhat invisible. And I know that ties into a lot of the work that Sage does in raising the visibility for this community. And this has been talked about before, I think on this call. I'm glad someone brought it up. As we talk about intersectionality and inclusion, we need to include age in that discussion as well. There's an entire generation that deserves not just to be recognized, but to be respected for their contributions. And from a demographic perspective, this means also looking beyond just this myth of gay affluence, that we're all wealthy with no kids and big incomes. And sure, there are those that fit that profile, but there are so many more older people in our community that have unique needs that are often invisible to companies. I was very proud last year at Wells Fargo, we actually embraced that segment of the community when we partnered with Sage to help develop a financial health program that was designed to create better financial outcomes for LGBTQ elders. All we had to do was look at the data to know that there was this huge need in the community, especially as it was dealing with the isolation and the health disparities that were created by COVID. So we collaborated with Sage, which if any of you on this call don't know about Sage, please go to sageusa.org as soon as you can, because they're an amazing organization doing such great work in the community. And we worked with them to develop a brand agnostic program called Sage Sense, which is a digital financial health platform that was created to be culturally competent for LGBTQ elders. And going back to one of the comments in the chat, the first myth that we busted was that older people aren't digitally savvy. I mean, we learned that they are, and they're willing to participate if the content is kind of authentic to their experience. So as the program came to life, we amplified it internally and externally. I think there might be a video that, Chris, you've put in a link to. We're not going to have time to share it now, but we also used our Pride campaign this year. And I think that's another way that you can kind of break out to bring some visibility to LGBTQ elders. We featured older people in our ads. It took some effort to sell, I'll be honest. Even the agency that we were working with had some resistance because it wasn't, young couples with a rainbow flag. But, none of this would have happened if there weren't a few of us of a certain age that were willing to identify the need and then work to pull the resources together to address it. So if I were to give a charge to this group, I would say, I would ask to be that champion if you can within your organization that brings visibility to this cohort.
Thank you, John, for bringing visibility to us. So, Chris, we're going to touch on the polls that were prompted. You said some people had already input. Would you like to share?
Sure. We'll walk through the last 4 polling questions that we have. Again, those are on the session page. So number 3. Have you experienced challenges in finding a new job or entering a new career field as a result of your age? And I can see some movement.
Wow.
And the majority, 40% of our respondents are saying maybe a little bit. Almost 40% are saying absolutely not, but a really troubling significant number, just over 20%, are saying absolutely, they've experienced those challenges. We'll keep moving, but please do go back to answer questions if you haven't. We talked a little bit today on the panel and in the chat about encore jobs, about the next act that you might have, whether it's moving into a new career or a new job at the firm where you're already working. And we wanted to see what kind of interest people had in making that kind of transition. That's our fourth question. All right. Interestingly, about 43%, 44%, it's moving as I speak, have thought about it. 24% and now 25% have no interest in any change. While we have in aggregate about 33% are either researching or making the transition or have made that change. So this is something that's real for almost 3/4 of our participants. This is great. Our fifth question, we have just one more, is your view of the programs in your workplace at the company that you are a part of. Do those programs help realize the potential of older people? Sorry, it may be miswritten as older workplaces. We mean older people. Whoa, it would appear that 58%, so almost 60% of our respondents don't have programs like this at their workplace. Almost 40%, 37%, they have some, but there's an opportunity to improve. And then 5% think they're leading the way. And I should mention that in the chat, we definitely had some great examples. Altria, I think, was one of them, of programs that are strong in this area. And then our last question was this idea of tying together coming out as an LGBTQ plus person and coming out around your age. And we have the whole continuum of whether or not you're in the closet for both, you're out as an LGBTQ plus person, or you are out on both fronts, both age and LGBTQ plus characteristics. And we also have some room, of course, for our beloved allies. And what's great here is that almost 70%, 67% are out on both fronts. So this is fantastic. Please do continue to answer the polls. It's fantastic to have that data given the number of people we have in the session today. Let me hand it back to you, Stacy.
Well, Chris, we're getting ready to wrap up, so appreciate you sharing all that. Any closing remarks?
Especially after hearing what I heard today, and the reason that I wanted to be involved in this panel is I think that our generation, we own a certain wisdom, experience, and resilience that we've earned because of our age and sometimes coming out in not very pleasant circumstances. But it's also our job to help those who are younger than us do the same so that they can honor their age and experience when it's their time.
Excellent. Thank you. Marianne, any closing remarks?
I would just thank the group for all the engagement. I've been scrolling through the chat as well and appreciate all the questions for us and the comments back and forth, supporting each other with some of these topics. So thanks for coming and for the really good engagement. Great. John?
I'd just say, instead of being concerned about the next generation kind of nipping at your heels, I would embrace them. This was kind of a hard lesson for me to learn because, I've been there, done that. I know what's right. But I will say some of the most educational and some of the most meaningful conversations I've had in the workplace have been when I stopped talking and really listened and learned from those that are coming up behind me. So that's really had an impact on now how I approach showing up in the workplace. So yeah, stop and listen when you can.
Thank you. Cheryl?
Yeah, I just want to put out a challenge to everyone in the room today. How can we promote age-friendly work environments? And if you have the opportunity to introduce this to leadership in your organization, take that opportunity. And also, if I can be of support to anyone here in the room, feel free to reach out at Sage and see what resources we have available to you.
Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists For employers on the line, it is key to attract and retain a diverse slate. And to our audience, you matter. You are an asset. Go forth and conquer, and let them hear you roar. We appreciate you embarking on this Aging is Living journey. Have a nice day.